The summer festival smelled like burnt sugar and lantern oil. That was what hit Josette first. Before the music, before the noise, before the sheer wall of sound that rose from the academy courtyard like a living thing. The sweetness of caramelized hazelnuts from the vendor carts, the sharp bite of oil-soaked wicks, dozens of them strung between the stone columns of Harrogate Academy's central arcade, each one throwing a wobbling circle of gold onto the flagstones below. And underneath it all, the green, alive smell of the herb gardens that bordered the south colonnade. Rosemary and wild thyme, and something sharper, maybe sage, crushed underfoot by 100 pairs of shoes that had no business walking through a garden bed. Josette Carwin pressed her back against the stone archway and tried to disappear. She was good at disappearing. 3 years at Harrogate as an herbalist apprentice had taught her the precise architecture of not being noticed, which doorways swallowed you, which corners bent the light, which hours the corridors emptied out and left you alone with your notes and your ink-stained fingers and the quiet that felt more like breathing than silence ever did. But tonight, the quiet was gone. The entire academy had poured into the courtyard for the midsummer address, and the reason was currently standing on the raised dais at the far end of the yard, flanked by 2 men in formal leather and speaking to the head chancellor with the kind of easy authority that made Josette's stomach do something complicated. The Alpha King of the Western Reaches. She'd heard he was coming. Everyone had heard. It was all anyone had talked about for 2 weeks. Lachlan Ridgemont, 26, unmarked, the youngest king to hold the Western throne in 4 generations. He was here to deliver the ceremonial midsummer address and announce a new scholarship endowment for the Academy's Healing Arts program. It was political. It was routine. It should have been boring. He was not boring. Even from this distance, 40 feet, maybe 50. Josette could see the way the lantern light caught the dark copper of his hair, brushed back from his forehead in a way that looked effortless, and probably wasn't. His riding jacket was the color of old wine, oxblood leather that fit across his shoulders like it had been cut specifically for the purpose of making people stare. And he was tall. Not just tall. He occupied space the way a bonfire did, drawing everything toward himself without trying. "You're staring." Josette flinched. Pippa Aldane materialized at her elbow like she'd been conjured, chin-length blonde hair swinging, mustard yellow dress slightly askew from whatever crowd she'd just shouldered through. She was holding 2 cups of something that smelled like spiced cider and grinning with the specific energy of someone who had already decided what was going to happen next. "I'm not staring," Josette said. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "The difference is about 3 feet of drool." Pippa handed her a cup. "Drink this. You look like you've forgotten how to swallow. I hate you. You love me. I'm the reason you leave your room." Pippa turned to face the dais, took a long sip, and let out a low whistle. "Okay, I see why the entire second-year dormitory has lost its collective mind. That man is... that jaw alone could cut glass." "Pippa? I'm being scientific. That's what you like, right? Scientific observation?" Pippa bumped her shoulder. "He's looking this way." "He is not looking this way. There are 400 people between us and that dais." "And yet..." Pippa's grin widened. "Blow him a kiss." Josette choked on her cider. "What?" "Blow him a kiss. Right now. I dare you." "Absolutely not. Why? He can't see you. You just said 400 people, massive distance. He'll never know. It's a festival dare. It doesn't count." "Everything counts." "Nothing counts. That's the whole point of a festival." Pippa grabbed her arm, bouncing on her toes, and Josette could see the wine flush on her cheeks that meant she'd started celebrating before the cider. "Come on. 3 years I've watched you hide in that apothecary workshop. 3 years of you turning down every invitation to every dance. You won't even let Marcus from Advanced Tinctures buy you tea, and he's been trying since autumn. Just one tiny, stupid, Meaningless blown kiss at a man who will never even know it happened. For me, because I love you, and I want you to do one reckless thing before we graduate. Josette stared at her roommate. Pippa stared back. The lantern swung overhead, and the music shifted to something slower, strings and a low drum, and the crowd moved like water. And Josette thought about 3 years of closed doors and careful mornings, and the way she always sat at the back of the lecture hall so no one would see her notes. "1," she said, "and if you ever bring this up again, I will put nightshade in your tea." That's the spirit. Josette turned toward the dais. The Alpha King was still speaking to the Chancellor, half turned away, his profile sharp against the lantern glow. She could see the bronze clasp at his collar winking in the light. She lifted her hand, pressed her fingers to her lips, and blew. It was nothing. A puff of air. A gesture so small it couldn't have traveled 3 feet, let alone 50. Pippa squealed beside her. Josette dropped her hand and felt the heat rush up her neck, already regretting it, already turning to say something sharp about how stupid that was. And the Alpha King turned his head. Not slowly, not casually. He turned like something had called him. Like a sound only he could hear, a frequency below the music and the crowd and the crackle of the lantern wicks. His gaze swept the arcade, passed over a dozen faces and landed on hers. Josette stopped breathing. His eyes were green. Not the pale, washed-out green of sea glass, dark, deep, the green of old forests after rain, and they were locked on her with an intensity that made the air between them feel suddenly, impossibly thin. He smiled, and then he reached up, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world, and closed his fist in the air beside his face, like he was catching something. His fingers curled around nothing, and he brought his closed hand to his chest. The Chancellor said something to him. He didn't look away. He mouthed 2 words. Even across the courtyard, even through the noise, Josette read them as clearly as if he'd spoken them against her ear. "Come get it back." "Oh," Pippa whispered. "Oh no. I need to leave," Josette said. "I need to leave right now." She didn't leave. She tried. She got as far as the herb garden corridor before the crowd thickened around the cider stalls, and she lost Pippa to a group of third-year alchemists arguing about sulfur compounds, and by the time she'd untangled herself and found the side passage that led to the residential wing, there were footsteps behind her. Not rushed, not aggressive, just steady, confident. The sound of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was content to follow at a pace that said, "I'll get there when I get there." Josette turned. The Alpha King was standing at the entrance to the corridor, one shoulder against the stone, arms crossed, the lantern light catching the dark copper of his hair and the edge of his smile. "You dropped something," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Warm, textured, with a roughness at the edges that made her think of wood smoke and gravel. "I didn't drop anything. You blew it. I caught it." He uncrossed his arms and held up his closed fist. "If you want it back, you'll have to come closer." Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. It was a dare. My roommate. The one in yellow who's currently hiding behind that pillar. Josette looked. Pippa's mustard dress was visible behind the nearest column, along with one wide eye and an expression of absolute delight. "She dared me," Josette said, as if this explained everything. "So you blow kisses at strangers when dared?" He tilted his head. "What do you do when you actually mean it?" The question landed in her chest like a struck bell. She opened her mouth and nothing came out, and in that silence, something happened. A crackle. Tiny, barely visible, like static before a storm, a bright snap of light between his extended hand and the air around her. Josette felt her hair lift at the temples, felt a warmth race up her arm that had nothing to do with the summer air, and the lantern nearest to them flared so bright its glass cracked. They both looked at the lantern, then at each other. That the Alpha King said quietly. Has never happened before. The lantern? No, not the lantern. He dropped his hand. His expression had shifted, the teasing ease replaced by something rawer, something that looked almost like shock. What's your name? Josette. Josette Carwin. I'm herbalist track. 3rd year. She was babbling. She knew she was babbling. Her skin was still humming from whatever had just passed between them. And you're Lachlan. He said it simply, like it was the only thing that mattered. Not his title, not his rank. Just the name. I was supposed to give a speech. You should probably go give it. I should. He didn't move. Are you going to be here after? I live here, the residential wing. Not this corridor specifically. I don't sleep in corridors. Something sparked in his eyes. Amusement, warm and genuine. And another crackle of light snapped between them, this time from the stone wall, a tiny bright arc like a match striking. Josette Carwin, he said, and the way he said her name, slow, careful, like he was committing it to something deeper than memory, made the warmth in her chest bloom until she could feel it in her throat. I'll come find you after. Stay where the lanterns are bright. He turned and walked back toward the courtyard. The crowd parted for him without being asked. Pippa exploded from behind the pillar. What just happened? I don't know. The lantern cracked, Josette. I know. He caught your kiss and told you to come get it back. I was there, Pippa. Pippa grabbed both her hands and stared at her with the intensity of someone witnessing a historical event. You are going to wait for him. You are going to stand in this corridor under a lantern and you are going to wait. If you go back to our room, I will barricade the door. This is insane. I blew a kiss at the Alpha King as a joke, and now there's lightning coming out of the walls when he looks at you. That's not a joke. That's a bond spark. Pippa's voice dropped. I've read about this. In the old texts, when a mate bond activates, the energy has to go somewhere. It manifests. Fire, light, sound. This is real. Josette's pulse was everywhere, her wrists, her throat, the hollow behind her knees. She pressed her hands against the cool stone of the wall and tried to think like a scholar. Mate bonds were theoretical in most of her coursework. Documented but rare, treated more like folklore than pharmacology. The texts described a resonance between two people, a frequency match so precise it produced physical phenomena. Sparks, heat, light. She'd thought it was metaphor. The speech lasted 40 minutes. She knew because she counted every one of them from the bench in the herb garden, where Pippa had stationed her under the largest lantern like a lighthouse keeper tending a beacon. The music resumed after. Dancing, laughter, the festival swelling back to full volume. And Josette sat with her hands clasped between her knees and her heart beating so loudly she was sure the rosemary could hear it. He came from the garden gate. Not the corridor, not the courtyard. He'd circled the long way, through the south colonnade, and he came through the low iron gate that led into the teaching plots, like he'd known exactly where she'd be. His jacket was unbuttoned now, the sand-colored Henley visible underneath, and his hair had fallen slightly forward over his forehead. He stopped 3 feet from her bench. You waited, he said. Pippa threatened to barricade our room. I like Pippa. He sat down beside her, not close enough to touch. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin, could smell leather and cedar and something that might have been the wind off an open field. Tell me about the herbs. She blinked. What? You're on the herbalist track. Tell me what's growing here. I want to know what you know. It was such an unexpected request that she answered before she could stop herself. She talked about the rosemary, the cultivar they'd developed for higher oil yield, the thyme bed that she'd designed as a first-year project and that the faculty had adopted permanently. The patch of wolfsbane in the far corner that only she was allowed to tend because she was the only student who'd passed the toxicology certification. He listened. Not politely. Not the glazed eye nodding of someone waiting for their turn to speak. He listened with his whole body, leaning slightly forward, asking questions that proved he was actually tracking what she said, and every time his hand moved on the bench between them, every time his fingers came close to hers, the air snapped. Tiny sparks, bright as fireflies, dancing in the space where their skin almost met. "You feel that?" he said, after a spark so bright it left an afterimage on her retina. "I study botanical chemistry. I know what electrical discharge looks like." "That's not what I asked." She swallowed. "Yes, I feel it. It started the moment you blew that kiss. Before you, I was standing on that dais, listening to the chancellor talk about endowment structures, and something hit me. Not physically. More like..." He paused, searching. "Like a flint striking. One spark, and then I could feel where you were. I turned and there you were. That's not possible. I was 50 feet away. And yet..." The garden was quieter now. The festival noise had moved to the far courtyard, drums and strings carrying over the rooftops. And here among the herbs it was almost peaceful. Just the two of them and the lanterns and the firefly sparks that danced every time the distance between them shrank. "I should tell you something," Josette said. She pulled her knees up to the bench and wrapped her arms around them, making herself small in the way she always did when she was about to be honest. "I don't do this. Any of this. Pippa had to physically drag me to the festival tonight. I've spent 3 years at this academy building a life that doesn't include..." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is." "Why?" The question was simple. His voice was gentle. "Because I watched my mother disappear into my father's life." The words came out before she could weigh them. She was a healer. A brilliant one. She developed 3 of the tincture formulas we still use in the intermediate course, and then she mated and it was like the light just went out. She stopped publishing, stopped practicing, became an extension of someone else's world. Josette's throat tightened. "I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen. I'd rather be alone and whole than partnered and invisible." Silence. The sparks between them slowed, not fading, but softening, as if the bond itself were listening. "Josette." He said her name like it was the only word in the language. "I didn't come to this academy looking for a mate. I came to fund a scholarship program because the best healer I ever knew trained here, and she couldn't afford the fees. And I swore that when I had the power to fix that, I would." He turned to face her fully. "I am the last person who would ask you to disappear. Your work in that wolfsbane garden, the toxicology certification, the cultivar research, the time bed, that's not the backdrop of your life. That's the point of it. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to sit on this bench." A spark leapt from his knee to hers. Not small this time, bright, visible, a tiny arc of light that crackled and left warmth blooming across her skin. "The bond doesn't lie," he said quietly, "but it also doesn't command. If you want me to walk away, I will. I'll go back to the dais and give the rest of my remarks about endowment structures, and I will never bring up the fact that you blew me a kiss from 50 feet away, and it rewired something fundamental in my chest." She laughed. It surprised her. A real laugh, sharp and sudden, and his face lit up in response, like she'd given him something he hadn't known he wanted. "You can't just say things like that," she said. "I can. I'm the king. I can say whatever I want." "That's not how that works." "It's exactly how that works." But he was smiling. The real version, not the composed one from the dais. This one crinkled the corners of his deep green eyes and made him look less like a sovereign and more like a man sitting in a garden, hoping. She uncurled her arms from her knees. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand on the bench between them. The air crackled. His hand moved to meet hers. Their fingers touched and the world went bright. Not blinding, not explosive, but luminous, like every lantern in the garden had doubled its flame. Josette gasped. His hand tightened around hers and she could feel it. The circuit closing, the frequency locking in, a hum that started in her palm and traveled up her arm and settled in her ribs like a second heartbeat. "There you are," he whispered. She looked up at him. His eyes were almost black in the lantern light, the green swallowed by something deeper, and he was looking at her the way she imagined astronomers looked at new constellations, with wonder, with hunger, with the specific reverence of someone who understood exactly what they were seeing. "I want to show you something," she said. She led him through the garden, past the teaching plots, past the medicinal beds, through the narrow gate that only staff and certified students could access. The path wound uphill through a stand of old oaks and opened onto the base of the bell tower, Harrogate's tallest structure, built 2 centuries ago, the bells removed decades before, but the tower left standing because the view was too good to tear down. They climbed the spiral stairs in near darkness, their joined hands throwing sparks against the stone walls like a torch. Each step lit the next, tiny arcs of gold bouncing off centuries-old stone, illuminating carved initials and water stains and the ghosts of students who'd climbed this same staircase for 200 years. Josette's free hand trailed the wall and felt the stone warm under her touch, as if the tower itself were responding to whatever current was flowing between them. "How many steps?" Lachlan asked, slightly breathless on the landing between the 3rd and 4th turns. 112. "I counted once when I couldn't sleep." "Of course you did. Knowledge is never wasted. Knowledge of 112 steps at 3 in the morning is, at minimum, very specific." She laughed, and a shower of sparks cascaded from their joined hands, scattering across the steps like dropped coins. By the time they reached the top, Josette's legs burned and her heart was pounding from more than just the stairs. The view swallowed her words. The academy spread below them like a map, the courtyards lit with festival lanterns, the colonnades glowing amber and gold, the distant hills dark against a sky so thick with stars it looked like someone had spilled sugar across velvet. The music drifted up from below, thin and sweet and half lost in the wind, and the night air was cool against her flushed skin. "I come here when I can't sleep," she said. "When the research isn't working, or when I miss my mother's garden, or when I just need to remember that the world is bigger than whatever's wrong. Nobody else comes up here. The stairs are terrible." "The stairs are criminal," he agreed. He was slightly out of breath, which made her feel better about her own burning lungs. "But this—" He looked out at the sky and she watched the starlight catch his face. "This is extraordinary. Don't tell anyone. It's mine. It's yours." He turned to her. "I wouldn't dare." They stood at the railing, shoulders touching, and the sparks had settled into something steady. Not crackling anymore, but glowing. A warm luminescence where their arms pressed together, soft as candlelight. The bond hummed between them like a plucked string finding its note. "Josette." His voice had changed, lower, rougher, stripped of the easy teasing. "I need you to know something. What happened tonight? The blown kiss, the sparks, this. I know it started as a dare, but what I felt when I turned and saw you was not a joke. It was the first time in my life something made sense without needing to be explained." Her eyes burned. She blinked hard and kept her gaze on the horizon. "You don't even know me. I know you designed a time bed as a first year and the faculty kept it. I know you're the only student trusted with Wolfsbane. I know you climb a bell tower with terrible stairs because you need the sky to be bigger than your problems." He turned to face her fully. "And I know that the bond between us is throwing visible light, which according to every text I've ever read means the match is exact," she finished. "The frequency match is exact. I've read the same texts." "Then stop pretending this is a dare." The words hung between them. Below, the festival music swelled. A crescendo, drums and strings building to something triumphant. And in the bell tower, in the starlight, Josette Carwin made a choice. She didn't choose to disappear. She didn't choose to shrink or hide or press herself into the stone the way she'd pressed into the archway at the start of the night. She chose to stay exactly where she was, visible, seen. "It stopped being a dare," she said quietly, "the second you caught it." The words settled between them. Below, a lantern sputtered and went out. Above, the stars were so close she felt she could press her thumb against them and feel warmth. Lachlan's hand came up to her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, slowly, as if he were memorizing the shape of her, committing it to the same deep place where he'd stored her name. And where he touched her, light bloomed, gold and warm and steady, not a spark, but a glow, spreading across her skin like sunrise. His eyes searched hers, green and dark and open in a way that made her understand that this man, this king, was just as terrified as she was, just as new to this, just as undone. She let him see all of it, the fear and the wanting and the bone-deep terror of being known by someone who had the power to look away and choosing to trust that he wouldn't. He kissed her. Not fast, not desperate. He kissed her like a promise, slow and deliberate and thorough, his hand cradling her jaw, his other arm sliding around her waist, pulling her against the warmth of his chest. The bond roared. Light erupted around them, not sparks, but a steady, brilliant glow that lit the entire bell tower, that poured through the open arches and spilled into the night sky like a second set of stars. Below, someone in the courtyard gasped. Someone else pointed upward. Josette didn't care. She kissed him back with 3 years of closed doors behind her and something vast and terrifying and bright opening ahead, and his arms tightened around her, and the bell tower blazed, and somewhere far below, she heard Pippa scream with joy. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. His breathing was ragged. His eyes were still closed. "You," he said, "are going to be the most magnificent thing that ever happened to me. You don't know that. I caught your kiss from 50 feet away and the building is glowing. I know." She laughed again, that sharp, surprised laugh, and felt his smile against her forehead, and the glow around them softened to something warm and steady and permanent. Below, the festival continued. The drums played. The lanterns swung. And in the bell tower above Harrogate Academy, the Alpha King of the Western Reaches held an herbalist apprentice in his arms and did not let go. The morning light was different in the academy after midsummer. Josette noticed it the way she noticed everything. Precisely, with the trained observation of someone who'd spent 3 years cataloging the way light fell on leaf surfaces at different times of day. The corridors were quieter. The festival decorations half dismantled, paper lanterns drooping from their strings like tired birds. She was in the Wolfsbane garden. 2 months had changed the garden and changed her, though the second transformation had been slower and more surprising than the first. The Wolfsbane was in full late summer bloom, purple spikes reaching for the sun, and Josette knelt between the rows with her journal open and her fingers stained green, and the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. The scholarship had been announced the week after midsummer. 40 full tuition grants for the Healing Arts program, funded by the Western Reaches Crown, administered by a new committee that included, at Lachlan's insistence, 3 student representatives. Josette had been nominated for the oversight board before she'd even known the position existed. "You're not supposed to put your name forward for your own girlfriend's committee," she'd told him. "I didn't. The chancellor did. I merely agreed that she was right." He visited every 2 weeks, sometimes more when the council schedule allowed, riding in with a single guard and the same scuffed boots, and a look on his face that made Pippa clutch her chest and pretend to faint. He sat in on her lectures when she let him. He read her research notes, all of them, even the failed experiments, especially the failed experiments, because he said those were the ones that told him who she really was. He asked questions that proved he'd been thinking about the answers since the last time they'd talked. Pippa had taken full credit. "I'm the reason the Western Reaches has a queen in waiting," she announced to anyone who'd listen, which was everyone, because Pippa's version of the story, which grew more dramatic with each retelling, had become campus legend. The blown kiss. The caught kiss. The bell tower glowing so bright that the night watch thought the building was on fire. "She's insufferable," Josette told Lachlan. "She's right," he said. And every time he walked into a room, every time he took her hand, the sparks returned. Tiny, bright, electric. Like the bond was reminding them both that what had started as a joke was the most honest thing either of them had ever done. She heard his footsteps now. The garden gate. The one only she was supposed to have a key to, though she'd stopped pretending she hadn't given him a copy. Swung open, and there he was. Jacket off. Sleeves of his Henley pushed to his elbows. Hair slightly damp from the ride. He stopped at the edge of the wolfsbane bed. "Don't step on the cultivars," she said, without looking up. Her journal was balanced on her knee, 3 pages of observations already filling the morning, and the ink on her fingers had turned her left thumb entirely green. "I know better." He crouched beside her, and the air between them hummed, warm, steady, the sparks so constant now they were almost like breathing. "I brought you something." She looked up. He was holding a small leather journal, hand-bound, with her initials pressed into the cover in gold leaf. "For the toxicology research," he said. "Your old one's falling apart." "My old one has character." "Your old one has nightshade residue on the spine, and I'm concerned for your health." She took the journal. Their fingers touched and light bloomed, soft, golden, the steady glow that had replaced the wild sparks of that first night. She traced the initials with her thumb. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He settled onto the ground beside her, long legs stretched between the planting rows, his back against the garden wall. The sun caught his face, and she saw the way 2 months of them, had changed the architecture of his expression. More open, less guarded. A man who'd spent years being sovereign learning, slowly, how to just be present. She went back to her notes. He closed his eyes in the sun. The wolfsbane bloomed around them. After a while, without opening his eyes, he raised one hand, pressed his fingers to his lips, and blew. The kiss crossed the 2 feet between them like a visible thing, a tiny arc of light, gold and bright, that landed against her cheek and sparked. Josette caught it, pressed her closed fist to her chest. "Come get it back," she said. He opened his eyes. He smiled. The real one, the one that was hers, the one that had started on a festival night when a girl who'd been afraid of disappearing did the bravest thing she'd ever done. He leaned over the wolfsbane. She met him halfway. The garden glowed.